quick run through on how to be able to get these files set up for the line art and the color blocking. Um, just as quickly as I can get this done for you. And then after that, I'm going to jump back over into my painting, probably turn the sound off and start reworking this. We'll start at the end for this one right now. Getting some fresh eyes on it and giving it a little bit of time away from it sometimes helps quite a bit just to sort of be able to reset my brain and get outside of it and remain objective about how things are going with this painting. So right now, I think that things are looking pretty muddled up here at the top. I think I've got some more room to be able to go back and add brighter highlights within this section and to start to push the overall kind of lighting scheme quite a bit more within this part. I also want to see if I can't get more light happening down in here just so that it highlights it a little bit stronger. And as we start to, this is one of the reasons why I always like to keep my navigator open when I'm looking at my paintings is because it allows me to be able to look at them in kind of a low scale. And there's still some lighting adjustments. Our elephant's really kind of disappearing here in a lot of ways. And I think that it can just be a little bit stronger. So there's a couple more passes. We're on the right track, but there's some touch up that needs to happen when it comes to the color spaces in here. I think that was absolutely the right call. Adding the jungle fog down here in the base just to be able to help the what you call it, the trunk start to stand out more, but there'll likely be more stuff that I'm going to do with this along the way. So I'm looking forward to painting that, but I wanted to just go ahead and jump in here and show you guys what it looks like after you've got your initial sketch, and then you start moving into getting that final line art work into your piece. So right now I've got it doubled or tripled up. There we go. So that's what it looks like when I actually sketch it at 25%. This is one of the suggestions that I gave some of y'all in your post was to please make sure that when you're sketching, you're not working at 100% on the opacity. Turn it down to 50% so you've got some ideas to be able to draw over your stuff and to build into your ideas. Now, I want to drop down my drawing even more to where it's barely there. I'm gonna go ahead and create a new layer. And then from there, I'm gonna turn my brush to black. I'm gonna hit B on my keyboard, just make sure I'm in my brush. I'm gonna go to Windows and Brush Settings, and I wanna make sure that my Shape Dynamics is turned on with the pen pressure. Now, for this final line, I wanna make sure that I'm up to 100% here. And this is for working with line art. Shape Dynamics, pen pressure, there we go. And you don't always have to use line art. I'm going to start with some line art here, and then I'm going to sort of dip away from it. But from this stage, what I really want to do is go in, oops, excuse me, and start just working my way through the composition. So I've got this rocky section up here. One of the things that I can also do with this is I can let my line art be really fine and thin the further back it is within my scene, and then allow that line art to get a little bit thicker. So I'm going to start line arting out this main character here, do some stuff on him around the cave and some of these rock structures. I had some questions about how to be able to render rocks and how to go through and think about those. And then I want to do this tree over here on the right hand side and let my line art get just a little bit thicker. And then over on the right hand side, I'll just go in and I'll start doing some color blocking and show you guys what that looks like if we want to uh, not use the line art and just go straight into the next steps. So line art, pretty simple. One of the things that you want to make sure that you do that's really going to help it a lot for yourself. We've got the pressure weight on the brush, so we're going to get that thick and thin line. But I also want to make sure that I turn up my smoothing to around 25% on the brushes. That might not be something that you intuitively think to do. That line's a little bit too thin. There we go. And you'll see that when I'm going through and making these lines and these structures, what I'm really trying to do here is I'm just doing little tiny pulls with it. Some of them are going to be really light. Not all of them are going to be super heavy lines. And I'm just going to go and work my way through. Now, some of them on the rocks, you get lucky because they don't have to be nice and clean lines. They can be a little bit jagged, a little bit wavy, but pulling quickly and confidently will help you get a smoother stroke. If you go really slow, that's when you're going to get the wavy lines and things are going to look a little bit choppier than maybe you want them to. So I'm pushing down, and you can notice that each one of these little pulls that I'm doing, just making little tiny strokes and then big pulls. And when I do the big pulls, my brush is down for about the same amount of time. That's kind of a neat little feature right there. So I'm pulling out the things from my sketches that I thought were sort of interesting and worth holding on to here. Some of these craggy, knobby little shapes for the rocks as they start to get built up. There we go. So that's all feeling pretty good right around there. Let's go in some of this. And then what did I see earlier today? I was doing some sketching and I noticed, the way that plants start to frame the base of things is really pretty remarkable. So we're going to put a little bit of grass just down here at the bottom. You can see that this is the sharpest, kind of noisiest shape that I've created so far. Just to be able to end those softly. You can see how I'm creating a whole little composition here with some grass, some other little pebbles. That's going to look really nice as I'm going through and doing this. All right. And just flowing around, right? So I've got these natural kind of curves that occurred when I was sketching earlier, and I want to use those for some of the ridges within my rock shapes and forms. There we go. Here we are. And now really quickly, we're starting to get some good rock shapes. This is looking and feeling pretty open over here. I am working really tight on my scene. Now that we start to zoom back, we can see that that's looking pretty good. It's got a nice flow to it. I've got some good tree shapes that are going to go up above this character. So maybe I don't want to I'm thinking that it needs like some vines or some other little plants and things that are starting to grow out of this section. But for now, let's just keep on moving forward. So this part back here, I really want to make sure that that is dipped away and contained in shadow. So I know that this whole little section is going to be pretty dark on the inside of the cave itself. And so let's go in. I'm just hitting the brackets on my keyboard. The brackets are the two buttons that are right to the right of the P key on the keyboard. And by doing that, I can increase or decrease the brush scale really, really quickly. So I'm trying to pull this. There it goes. That was a good pull on the shape. If I hadn't gotten it a second time, I probably would have switched over to the pen tool. And I'm just using my bracket really quick to change the scale. Give it some good shape. There it is. That's a nice clean pull. We've got that good thick and thin line that really makes for strong quality line work. And I hope that, if this is something that you don't feel that confident in judging within your own works right now, that this quick little demo that I'm doing really starts to give you a baseline for what it is that, professional artists out there are looking for when we're looking for good line work. Going in here, I want to make some of it thicker to denote that it's got some hard edges on it. Same thing's going to go over here. The character's eyes, they're going to go down. So it's got kind of a Spider-Man 2099 look to him. I think that works pretty well. Give it some embossing with the thickness of the lines. It's working pretty well. And I do want to denote the shape of the head just a little bit more, even though it's a stone and nice and old. We can do all kinds of fun stuff on this stone. There it goes. So I've sort of established that he's got a no neck going on there. So let's do that on this side as well. Really messing with the shapes of the arms, trying to keep those consistent on each side. Mm. So that's a really wavy line. That one didn't turn out too good. That's a much cleaner pull. Hitting E on my keyboard to get into my eraser. For now, since I'm doing the line work, I want to turn that eraser up to a hard brush and to 100%, so I'm not having to fight against the eraser. I like the round shape that's going on here. Let's use that here as well. So you can see how I'm sort of changing the and refining the shape at this stage also. There we go. So that line is going to work really well for me. I like it because it mimics the line on the other side in a pretty strong way. Let it taper off towards the end. That feels good to me. We're starting to get some real weight on this character's arms. Have the finger kind of wrapped around itself here. Got Ninja Turtle hands. There we go. I like that the feet are these sort of square shapes, sort of like Baymax. He's made out of stone. Open this up. Again, this guy's been sitting here for a very long time, so we can add some other little rocks and things that are starting to grow up around this character just to be able to help connect him to the ground just a little bit better. You can see how adding these extra little bits of shrubbery, maybe another little rock that's appeared there. And we're going to break this line up just a little bit so that it's got a little bit more texture. Let's give him a little bit more texture here right around the edge to denote the squareness, like that shape that's going on. So I'm going to leave a little bit of that line work in there, and that's feeling pretty good for me. So let's go in here. Same deal. We want to give him some nice big old shrubs that are growing up on the side of him, just to be able to connect those feet to the ground. I'm trying to avoid doing the corners on the ground, so I want to hide those corners within this the shrubbery that I'm creating. That always helps to be able to connect your objects to the ground a little bit more successfully. And any of the big lines that I've got here, I'm just going to break those up with a little bit of shrubs. Really helps. So I hope that's a good tip for you guys as you start to approach your jungle ruins. That's not something you're going to get, in most tutorials or anything that you'll see off of DeviantArt or anywhere like that, for how to be able to connect your objects to the ground successfully. There we go. Got a stick of butter for those legs. Here we go. Nice pull. Line feels good there. I was lucky. I thought I was going to mess that one up. I'm going to try and close my line gaps wherever I can, but for the most part, that's going to do me pretty well for this character. I don't want him to be too thick right around there. I'm going to let the lighting do the talking for me, and that kind of constitutes an entire section on this drawing. So if I'm feeling good about one part, maybe I want to go in and create a new layer for another section that I'm going to be creating. You notice that I just pulled out on my piece quite a bit. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to start working my way through this tree. Same deal, the exact same sort of line techniques I'm doing, where I'm doing these quick little pulls here and there, working my way around the exterior of the tree. That one was a little bit sloppy, getting bigger. Gonna work a little bit larger on the back side here as we get closer. That's working for me. I like the double thing that's going on. It's a sloppy line. Be a little bit more intentional there. I'm trying to balance out the amount of noise that I'm creating with the lines and where the line pull is actually straight. So here we go. We got some of my leaf shapes. I don't want to paint every single leaf within my shot, but creating a few of those, it's a little not quite as clean as I want it to be, will really go a long ways to create that illusion and let the viewer's eye start to fill in those gaps along the way. So we got another leaf shape here. Leaf shape. All right. So I've seen some trees that didn't quite turn out as well as they could have. Think about the way that branches actually split off, right? So we've got one branch that starts, another branch right over here. Working pretty good. Working through it. One of the things I like to do with my vines is to add little leaves to them. That always, works pretty well. Again, you'll notice that I don't pull the line correctly every single time. Let's get in a little bit closer. Yeah, holding down B to get back to the brush tool. And yeah, we're going to close up this little line right here. It's working pretty good for me so far. Actually, that line's okay. I want to try to mimic it so that it feels a little bit more intentional on the other side. I've got a lot of moss that I'm going to go through and create on that tree later on down the line. Let's see where I can add some more little leaf forms just to be able to give it a little bit more interest here. That's kind of nice right on that little side too. And I think that's looking pretty great. So right now we've got a convergent line that's happening with this plant shape here. What I just did kind of solves for it pretty nicely, but I want to try and avoid the convergent lines wherever I can. So let's break it up. Give half a plant. There we go. Got some other leaves that are going to be showing up here. So one of the good things that you can do for these types of paintings is to think about your different leaf forms that you're using. Yeah, that's really kind of where you're developing your shape language for your illustration. Now, each one of you as artists have got sort of a starter pack for shapes that come a little bit more naturally to you, but the only way that you're going to expand that shape language is if you continue to look and really do a master study on other artists and other digital illustrators and say, hey, it's important for me to be able to understand as a creative, as an artist, how to be able to do, as many different styles of plants and plant forms and shapes as I possibly can. So you can see that a lot of this is starting to get pretty messy here. If I was doing this for a professional project, I would want to go back, clean these up, separate them out visually just a little bit more. I'm overlapping them. That can hide it a little bit, but there's still a lot of cleanup that can happen with a lot of these line forms over here on the side. It's starting to look a little bit better. Let's get that one more proper so it sits up on top. There we go. Let's zoom out. There we are. So those guys are looking pretty solid right now for some good line shapes going across within that section. Got my tree that's starting to come together. I've got my moss on the tree, got the other trees in the background, and this stuff all starts to flow really fast. I think that oftentimes there's a misconception that line work should take a couple hours or just a few days to be able to really get it going. When you get in the flow and you start to use those quick little pops and pulls with your hand, the line art becomes pretty automatic. And once you've done it, quite a few times, it starts to feel like second nature. But let's jump forward. I'm going to leave the line art over on this left-hand side now, and let's start looking at what the next steps would look like if I was going to start filling this character in. So we've got our, we go back to that previous layer and just gonna fill this part out very quickly. So I can show you guys how I'd render the inside of that cave and this whole little section with the base layers. So whenever I'm working on coloring one of my pieces, the first thing I always want to do is start from as far back within the piece as I can possibly see. A lot of times that is going to be the sky that you're going to want to be creating and working your way through. If you can't see the sky like you can't in this piece, then whatever the farthest thing back is, in this case, it happens to be my cave, that's where I'm going to start my painting and start my work. So let's just go in and I'm going to try and very quickly fill in some of this stuff. There's a lot more little details that I've sketched out and created on the inside, but for now I just want to fill in some of these rock shapes. We've got other plants here that are coming up. There's some cool kind of overhanging plant stuff that I've created over here. You can see that I'm really just going pretty fast with it. That's not a good leaf shape. Be honest with yourself. No, I can do better than that. There we are. It's a good little piece of grass. Calvin and Hobbes, the artist that worked on that comic strip for that many years, I think would be proud of the grass. It reminds me of Calvin's hair. All right, here we go. Cool. So now we've got that section, and I'm just trying to close some of my loops really fast. All right, so what I'm going to do next is I am not a color expert by any means. So what I'm doing for my colors, where I'm getting my colors from, is I'm going to be pulling them from my reference image whenever possible. In this case, I've got my reference image, and what I'm looking for here is my midtones. So I'm not looking for the darkest color, I'm looking for the middle color within the space. This means that on these rocks over here, I do not want my super dark shadows. I do not want my super bright highlights. I want the middle tone for these rocks. And the middle tone for these rocks happens to be somewhere in here or somewhere over here. There's a darker tone that's existing, but yeah, I want to pull the middle tone for these rocks. So that means any of the rocks that aren't in shadow, there we go. Got it all. Cool. The next thing I want to do here is I'm using my magic lasso. That's over on the left-hand side. It's the fourth one down. If you don't see it, you can hold down left click. And if you got, I don't know, quick selection tool or something else, any of these little tools that have an arrow down at the bottom right-hand side, when you hold down left click, that'll open those tools up and then it'll start to appear for you. So I've got my line layer selected. And I'm using the magic wand tool. I do have a closed line right now. That makes it a little bit easier, but you'll see in a moment when I start to do it with do this middle color section without the lines, that it basically works the exact same way. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to expand my selection. There's a good reason why I want to do this, so that I'm getting my line art fully behind the black line, so I don't have a thin little pixel lasso going around my pieces. Sometimes it becomes easier to give your line art a color. I've got a new layer. That's my There we go. So we've created a new layer. I've got my middle tone for my rocks selected, and I'm going to go ahead and fill that part in. All right, so that whole section is filled now. I'm going to start grouping my colors. So select, modify, expand. Each time I'm going to be doing that. Still have that color selected, and I'm going to fill it in. I'm double clicking, I'm left clicking twice just to be able to make sure I'm really filling the heck out of that space. Now I've got one other little color that's starting to exist within my rocks back here. I'm going back to my red layer, selecting, select, modify, expand. And now this part, I'm going to put it underneath the tan rock layer. And I'm going to go ahead and double click and fill that in. You can see that's got a little bit of green to it. It's not exactly white, or not exactly just pure gray, which is nice. I like that. And these rocks here have got a shadow pass, but that is going to be their middle tone. You get better at picking out and finding that middle tone pretty quickly. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more here. Let's grab these dudes, and we've got some other stuff to be able to outline, but this will get us 90% of the way there. Select under the drop down, modify, expand. I'm expanding it by 2 pixels, and I'm hitting enter on my keyboard to do this so quickly. From there, I've got my middle rock gray, and my rock has been filled in. It's looking pretty nice. I'm going to go through and I'm going to repeat this step for all of my layers. I want to get my entire painting filled up with the middle tone before I go through and start doing a shadow pass. And when as this course continues to go on, you'll see that I do this a lot, where I'm constantly sort of batching operations is the best way to call it, I think, where I'm doing all the steps for one portion of this at one time. This helps me to develop my composition at a couple different stages and in unison. If I don't do that, then things start to get away from themselves. Some areas will become more rendered than other areas, and I really don't want that to happen. I want to be able to develop this thing equally. So if I was doing this not as this quick example for you guys, I would go through and do all my line art within my entire piece, and then I would begin the flat middle tone shading portion of as I move forward, get all that created. But I'm just trying to hit some of the highlights here for you guys. I hope you can understand that distinction. Over here on the right-hand side, let's see if I've got a tree or any kind of foliage within this shot. And there are absolutely no trees. We've got some green little glowy slime within this piece, not giving us many trees at all. This piece over here, almost entirely black. All right, so this has got a ton of deep colors within it, and the midtones are almost impossible to find. The amount of contrast here that's going on between the super bright highlights, see how bright that is, and how dark the darks are. It's all over the place. This is a really strongly contrasted image, whereas this stuff back here isn't even really that bright. That's still more in the gray areas, even though that looks like one of the brightest sections within this painting. I'm going to keep winging it. We've got this sort of middle tone brown here. That's not the prettiest brown in the entire world, but I think it can serve us for what we need to do with this tree over here on the right-hand side. So this tree we're going to color this in as if we were not using line art, and we're going to push forward into the flat color, which is the middle tone, which is what you saw me just doing here, right? But we're going to do it without line art. So I've got my initial sketch within my piece. Let's go down to the base layer. My opacity is up to 100%. I'm still on my hard brush. My smoothing is still up to 25. So essentially, I've still got a line art brush that I'm working with here. And I'm going to start working my way around the edge of this tree, just like I would with the line art. So we're blocking in our tree. I don't have to focus as much. It goes actually a lot faster this way because I don't have to worry about having good, solid, quality weighted lines on the outside of my tree trunk. All right, so there's probably still some area. Oh, that's a whole root. Look at that. I made an awesome root for this for this painting. I was on my game when I sketched this thing out. It's coming all the way towards the foreground. That looks nice. All right, there we go. Cool. So we got that part crashing into the edge. Let's go in and let's get the back piece. Again, I just want to break some of that up a little bit so that there's always sort of a wishbone looking shape with one bigger one and one smaller one on the tree branches. It helps. So it can be fun too to do tree branches that might have fallen off at one time. I was looking at a tree earlier today that, there are some wild tree forms out there in the world that grow in other countries that you would not believe. Okay, so there we go. We got our tree with just about a closed line on it. And that looks awfully similar to what we just did for the line art just a second ago. Well, we're in luck because we're doing it without the line art. All I have to do now is, oops, I don't have my line art all the way closed. So let's see where we've got a break. Oh, you're looking for holes on my lines. Oh, there it is. This guy. These two and this one. There we go. Let's try that again. So I'm using my magic wand tool just to be able to select on the inside. Now we've got a clean selection on the inside of this tree. And I'm going to go to select, modify, expand it by 2, just to be able to make sure that I'm over my previous line art. And on the same layer, I'm just going to double click. And now I've got a fully filled in tree for my first crack at this thing. Okay, so I would go through, I would outline all my different layers, just like I was doing with the rock, and separating out my different regions so that everything is a different piece. From there, my next step is to go in, and I've got a lot more detail that I've included within my sketch that's not really showing up right now, so I can pull this sketch over the top, excuse me. But the next trick that I want to do here, when I go back and I start doing my shadow pass. So please keep in mind that I would complete the mid-color tone throughout this entire image, separating and blocking like and similar colors together. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to start working my shadow pass. So to work the shadow pass, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control on the keyboard and I'm going to select the icon over here on the right-hand side. This icon on the right-hand side is going to allow me, when I hold down the Control button and click on that icon, it allows me to region select my object or my whatever is contained within that layer. I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. And let's go back to my painting board. So that was my midtone that I picked just a moment ago. We've got a few other midtones that are really existing within this tree. I feel like some of this is a little bit too dark. This is where style starts to play a part within your paintings. We do want to create a light source. I like the light source within each one of these. It's kind of coming from the top left-hand side. You can see here we've got it coming from the top left. Here it's breaking through the trees as well in a really nice kind of way. So let's pretend that that's going on with this tree that we're about to render. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my opacity on my brush. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to take the opacity and I'm going to turn it down to like 48, 50% when I go through and start rendering. I'm still have my hard brush turned on. This is where you can start to use Kyle's Ultimate Charcoal Pencil. Works pretty well for these also, just to be able to give you a nice little texture. Please make sure that your smoothing is turned on to like 25%. And again, when you're doing your shadow pass, leave it down at 50% or 30%. So this way you get 1 to 3 different passes on the rendering before you're actually locked into that final color. And I want to work really far back here at first. So that I'm not getting too tight or too close up to my painting, and it gives me some room to be able to make some choices along the way. So remember, I'm thinking in my head that I've got my lighting coming from the top left-hand side. All of this always works better when you're working from as far back within your painting at first as you possibly can, because you learn things about the lighting along the way. You also are building in that atmospheric perspective and building into these deep, dark shadows. So I'm working on a new layer right now. I'm not on that same flat brown layer that I had just a moment ago. And I'm starting to just work in some of my shadows on this tree. So once I get my shadow pass completed, I'm thinking about, where on this tree is the light not hitting? And I'm making some big choices. A lot of times when these don't look as good as they can, it's because you're being a little too timid or you're working too close. Working further back will force you to make some larger decisions about these spaces. So I'm going to turn this down to like 19%. 19% is really, really low, but that allowed me to do a good sort of natural gradient on this tree. There we go. Getting just a little bit more shadow, a little bit more color on there. And we're almost in a good position to start adding the highlights into it. So I'm adding just a little bit more texture here and there. All right, so I want this to be kind of a knob on the tree. Getting a gradient. So it's dark back there, but it's still not quite as dark as it can absolutely get. And now we've got our highlight pass. So on this tree, with my shadow pass, it's looking pretty good. We're with the shadow pass, really what you're looking for is to start defining some overall shapes within this tree. It's working at this stage. It can still be refined quite a bit. This comes at the very end. I want to show you what refinement looks like. That would be me taking my smudge tool, I'm using again a stylized brush for the smudge tool. And I really want to go in and just start painting on that shadow pass and just making sure that I feel more comfortable now that I'm a little bit tighter with the choices that I'm making for where these shadows are going to be on this particular tree. There we go. So going left to right to be able to soften some of them up, and then I go down to be able to create a nice gradient. So if I want this to be rounder right here, I'm going up and down against it and then softening it so that it's not quite as hard in every single place. If you overuse the smudge tool, people, just like when you're using the stamp brushes, will be able to tell that you are totally overusing the smudge tool, and it will cheapen your work up quite a bit. but we can see how that's starting to soften some of my areas. I'm going to come back to my tree and we want to look for the highlights. So we've got these super bright glowing things. I think that's supposed to be like some kind of nest or something on this tree. What's actually going on with the light, I think, is more over here on the left-hand side. We've got some other light, but this has got the atmospheric perspective as we get a little bit higher in there. And I think that this is sort of a good first highlight on this tree. We do have some moss and things that I definitely want to add to it, but my highlight layer is going to be on a new layer. I'm going to start again with my brush up to like 50, 60%, somewhere around there. And now I want to think about where the highlights are going to arrive on this tree. You can see that this is a really bright result that I'm getting. And that's okay with me. Maybe a little bit lower. That's one of the things, man. Photoshop, you can always turn these up and down as you need to. All right, so let's say that here's another spot where it's going to get some good lighting right along here. Get a little bit of lighting. And see how I'm breaking up that highlight quite a bit. I'm also thinking about the shapes of the lines that I'm creating. So I want to make sure that I'm still creating energetic, interesting line shapes with these highlights. So this is going to be the main spot where that highlight is going to hit. I want it to dissipate as we start to move a little bit further up. So I'm bringing my brush down to 23%. So I've got my heat area, my brightest area for where I want my highlight to be on this tree. And then I'm just bringing that back so that I'm still getting some of the color, but I'm not able to work quite as definitively as I was a moment ago. There we go. Now we've got a nice secondary highlight that's happening a little bit more right up here, but we don't want to be able to see this throughout the entire thing. And let's say that this area is fully getting rendered and covered. So we got some rough bark that's going to exist right over here. And again, we want that highlight to sort of dissipate as we move across the tree over here. All right, pretty good looking. As we start to zoom out on this guy, we've got an okay looking highlight on this tree. I think that the coloration of the highlight is a little bit too intense. So whenever I see something like this, you can always mess with your color interpretation or your layer interpretation, however you say that word. That's just the options up here at the top within the layer panel. So you've got normal, linear burn. There's a whole science to how those are actually arranged. I think one of them deals with whites, the other one deals with highlights, or sorry, with blacks. Hmm. All right, so a little soft one there is looking a little bit nicer. But yeah, let's bring it back up to normal and try some other things to be able to make this feel a little less, I don't know how to call it. Looks like a folk art tree. It's not really, uh, doesn't feel as professionally rendered as I'd like for it to be. So I'm going to go in with my eraser now. Since none of those really gave me the result that I wanted. I'm going to soften my eraser up. So I'm using my soft brush. I'm going to turn the opacity down to like 27%. All right. And let's turn down some of those highlights. I'm going to zoom out again on my tree. Let's turn some of those highlights down quite a bit. So I'm just pulling back on them. We'd still have some of the really bright sections here and there, but I don't think it needs to be quite as extreme as it was. I think I kind of overdid it with the highlights. I got overzealous. Okay, so that's looking immediately a lot better to me, just pulling it back on the highlights. I sort of don't want to show this to you guys because this is another one of those that you can totally overuse. But this is the dodge tool. And so now I've got the dodge tool selected. Dodge tool is going to bring things closer to white and lighten some of these highlights up. So I'm just going back and I'm creating, think of it as like a wet forest, as if there's some of these areas that are just a little bit brighter And I've got a little bit of glint to them. On the tree, still like that, right around there, just brightening it up just a little bit more, even though it's barely there. And that's looking nicer for me. One of the other things that you can do that always looks really great within these shots is adding a secondary light, secondary shadow or secondary light source within your piece. So I am holding down my base layer again. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new layer on top of this. So I got my base layer selected, get my layers over here. New layer on top of everything that I've been creating previously with my highlight layer. And now let's see if we have any secondary lighting that's going on. Yeah, we got a little bit of blue bounce lighting that's starting to happen on these rocks down here. You can see there's some teal that's starting to exist within here. That's coming up off of the water, which makes perfect sense. We don't have any water within our shot, but we'll pretend like there is. So I've got a new layer that I've selected. I'm on 22% opacity. I'm going to go up to 50% and commit to this just a little bit more. This tree can look even better with, what you call it, some moss on it too. But the secondary lighting goes generally inside of your shadow pass. There it is. I'll say that it's coming off from the hard right of my shot, so it's going to catch some of this, some of that. And it can help to break up these shadow areas in slightly more interesting ways or give you just a little bit of extra rim lighting for some areas that are starting to dissipate that maybe you didn't want to. There we go. There it is. Cool. So now we've got a little bit of extra lighting. This real subtle little green color that we pulled from the water. And you can see that that's making a pretty big difference. We're going to try the layer interpolation on it again. I think I saw one that made it even brighter. It's too bright. Oh, that's kind of nice when it's real subtle like that. There we go. That's got a little bit more hue to it. I'm going to turn down the opacity, hit E on the keyboard for my eraser again, and I'm just going to pull back some of those highlights here and there so that they're still within my piece, but they're not quite as screaming as they are currently, and that looks really, really nice to me. So we're starting to get a pretty well rendered tree that's got some good form, some good lighting to it. Once this lighting starts to work and meld with the rest of the painting and the design that I've created, I think that we're going to be in a pretty good spot to be able to move forward with this design and with this piece of work. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause the video. We'll do a second section as I go in and start reworking this painting and getting the highlights to feel a little bit stronger in there while I'm pushing forward. But thanks so much for having a look at this. I hope this is helpful to give you just sort of the base groundwork for how to be able to set up either line work or a flat mid color, and then just a quick demo for how you're going to be pushing forward. Again, once you get all your midtones in there, that's when you go through and do your shadow pass on the entire painting, and then you're going to go back and then you're going to do your highlight pass on your entire painting. It's really important that you develop everything at once, and then you're going to do your polish layer, and then you can do your secondary lighting and stuff like that. But you want to do these in big passes and develop the entire composition at the same time. And that's all I have to say about that.